Karen said, "You don't look like law enforcement." Then I showed my badge. The midday sun beat down on the bustling scene of the Meadowbrook Community Fair, the air thick with the mingled scents of popcorn, barbecue, and the sweet perfume of blooming prize-winning roses. Laughter and the cheerful chatter of neighbors filled the air, punctuated by the occasional enthusiastic bark of a well-behaved canine participant in the pet parade. It was the kind of wholesome small-town event that Norman Rockwell might have painted, a picture of idyllic community spirit. My attire, a comfortable pair of jeans, a plain polo shirt, and sturdy walking shoes, blended seamlessly with the casual atmosphere. I was on duty, but in an unmarked capacity, my focus on maintaining a low profile while keeping a watchful eye for any potential disruptions or security concerns. Community events, while generally positive, could sometimes attract unwanted attention, and a proactive, discreet presence was often the most effective way to ensure everyone's safety and enjoyment. Meadowbrook, for all its charm, was not immune to the occasional bout of small-town drama, and at the center of much of that drama often resided Karen Mitchell. Her reputation as the quintessential HOA Karen was legendary. Her unwavering dedication to enforcing rules and her unshakable belief in her own authority, extending far beyond the confines of her meticulously maintained property. Tales of her meticulously documented noise complaints, her vehement objections to perceived violations of neighborhood aesthetic standards, and her general air of self-appointed civic leadership were well circulated within the local law enforcement circles. While her intentions were often framed as a desire to maintain order and community standards, her methods frequently bordered on the officious and occasionally veered into outright harassment. I had encountered Karen on a few minor calls in the past. A dispute over a misplaced recycling bin, a complaint about a neighbor's allegedly overgrown hedge, and each interaction had left me with a distinct impression of her unwavering self-importance and her tendency to question any authority that didn't align with her own. Today, Karen was in full community guardian mode, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair gleaming under a wide-brimmed sun hat, her crisp linen dress radiating an air of unimpeachable civic responsibility. I had already observed her engaging in several lengthy and somewhat animated conversations with event organizers and volunteers, her tone suggesting she was offering crucial guidance on everything from vendor placement to the proper disposal of trash. My attention was drawn to a slightly more animated interaction unfolding near the entrance to the craft fair tent. A small crowd had gathered, their expressions ranging from mild amusement to thinly veiled annoyance. At the center of the commotion was Karen, her voice raised in a tone of unmistakable indignation, addressing a young volunteer who looked increasingly flustered. As I subtly made my way closer, I could hear snippets of the exchange. Absolutely unacceptable. These signs are clearly in violation of the event regulations. They are obstructing pedestrian flow, and frankly, they look rather unprofessional. Karen's pronouncements were delivered with her characteristic air of unwavering certainty. The young volunteer, a college student with a name tag identifying her as Sarah, was trying to explain something, her voice barely audible above Karen's. "But we were told to put them here by Mr. Henderson. He said it was the best way to direct people to the pottery demonstration." Karen waved a dismissive hand. "Mr. Henderson may have his opinions, but I assure you, they are incorrect. As a long-standing member of this community and someone deeply invested in the success of this fair, I can tell you that these signs need to be moved immediately. And frankly," her gaze swept over Sarah's slightly rumpled t-shirt and practical shorts, "you don't exactly look like someone in a position to be making these kinds of decisions." It was a classic Karen move, dismissing someone's authority based on their appearance while simultaneously asserting her own self-proclaimed expertise. I had seen this play out before, and it rarely ended well. I approached the small gathering, my demeanor calm and non-confrontational. "Excuse me, is everything all right here?" I asked, my voice even. Karen turned to me, her expression immediately shifting from imperious indignation to one of mild suspicion. Her eyes scanned my casual attire, lingering on my plain polo shirt and lack of any obvious uniform or official insignia. "Well, not exactly," she said, her tone implying that I was likely just another uninformed bystander. "This young woman seems to be under the impression that she can place signage wherever she pleases, creating an unsightly obstruction. I turned to Sarah, offering a reassuring nod. Sarah, what's your understanding of the sign placement? Sarah looked relieved at the intervention. Mr. Henderson from the organizing committee told us to put the directional signs here to guide people to the pottery demonstration. He said it was a popular event and we needed clear signage. Karen scoffed. Mr. Henderson is clearly mistaken. And frankly, she turned her attention back to me, her gaze still assessing my lack of official appearance. You don't exactly look like someone in a position to be resolving this. Are you even with the fair organizers? Her implication was clear. I didn't look like anyone important enough to be involved. Karen's inherent distrust of anyone who didn't meet her narrow definition of authority, coupled with her self-proclaimed expertise, was about to collide with the reality of my actual role. The stage was set for the moment when her superficial judgment would meet the undeniable authority of law enforcement. Karen's dismissive tone hung in the sunny air of the community fair, drawing a few more curious glances from nearby attendees. Her assumption that my casual attire equated to a lack of authority was a familiar, albeit frustrating, one. People often equated law enforcement with crisp uniforms and polished badges, overlooking the fact that effective policing sometimes required a more understated approach. I maintained a calm demeanor, my focus on de-escalating the situation, rather than engaging in a power struggle with the self-appointed guardian of Meadowbrook's aesthetic sensibilities. Ma'am, I said, my voice even and polite, I'm just trying to understand the situation and ensure everything runs smoothly for everyone. Karen huffed, clearly unimpressed by my attempt at neutrality. Well, it wouldn't be running smoothly if people were allowed to haphazardly place unsightly signs wherever they pleased. There are regulations for these things, you know. And this young woman, she gestured dismissively at Sarah, doesn't seem to grasp the importance of adhering to them. Sarah, bless her patient heart, tried again. But Mr. Henderson specifically, Karen cut her off with a sharp wave of her hand. Mr. Henderson needs to stick to organizing the bake sale. Signage is clearly not his forte. She then turned her attention back to me, her gaze still assessing my lack of official appearance. And as for you, she continued, her tone laced with suspicion, are you even sure you're with the fair organizers? You look rather out of place. The implication was clear. I didn't fit her preconceived notion of who should be in charge or resolving issues. Her judgment was based entirely on my casual clothes, completely disregarding the possibility that authority might wear different guises. Ma'am, I said, my patience starting to wear thin, I assure you I have the best interests of the community at heart. Karen snorted. That's what they all say. But actions speak louder than words, and your lack of any official identification is rather concerning. She folded her arms across her chest, her stance radiating suspicion and challenge. I think I need to speak to someone in charge, someone who actually looks like they know what they're doing. Her gaze swept around, as if searching for a uniformed officer or someone wearing an official event staff t-shirt. The small crowd that had gathered was starting to grow, their expressions shifting from mild amusement to a more palpable sense of awkwardness. Several people recognized Karen's familiar brand of officious behavior and were likely anticipating a classic Karen moment. Before I could respond, a familiar voice cut through the air. Everything all right here, Karen? It was Sergeant Miller, a uniformed officer with the Meadowbrook Police Department, making his rounds through the fairgrounds. Karen's demeanor immediately shifted. Her confrontational stance softened, replaced by a more deferential tone. Oh, Sergeant Miller, just sorting out a minor issue with some improperly placed signage. This young woman, she gestured at Sarah again, albeit with slightly less vehemence, seems to have misunderstood the regulations. Sergeant Miller, a seasoned officer who had dealt with Karen's minor issues on numerous occasions, offered a polite but knowing smile. And what's your understanding of the situation, Sarah? He asked, his tone calm and professional. Sarah repeated her explanation about Mr. Henderson's instructions, her voice a little steadier now that a uniformed officer had arrived. Sergeant Miller listened patiently, then turned to Karen. Karen, the organizing committee has the authority to determine the placement of event signage. If there was a miscommunication, I'm sure it can be resolved through the proper channels. Karen, momentarily subdued by the presence of a uniformed officer, nodded reluctantly. Well, I just wanted to ensure everything looked presentable for our lovely community. Then her gaze flicked back to me, a hint of her earlier suspicion still lingering. And who is this gentleman, Sergeant? He seemed to be intervening. Sergeant Miller turned to me, a slight smile playing on his lips. Karen, this is Alex, my last name. Alex is with us today, ensuring everything runs smoothly. He deliberately kept his explanation vague, respecting my unmarked duty status. However, Karen's mind had already jumped to a conclusion. With you? She asked, her tone still skeptical. He doesn't look like a police officer. Her gaze raked over my casual attire again, her disbelief palpable. Sergeant Miller's smile widened slightly. Looks can be deceiving, Karen. He then turned his attention back to Sarah. Sarah, if Mr. Henderson instructed you to place the signs there, then that's where they should be. Thank you for your help. Kihana. As Sergeant Miller moved on, continuing his rounds, Karen's gaze remained fixed on me, her brow furrowed in unconvinced suspicion. The conflict was far from over. My lack of a uniform seemed to be a significant obstacle in her mind, preventing her from accepting any authority I might possess. Her self-proclaimed expertise and her inherent distrust of anyone who didn't fit her narrow definition of law enforcement were clearly going to continue to be a factor. The stage was set for a more direct and undeniable assertion of my authority. Sergeant Miller's ambiguous introduction, while intended to de-escalate the immediate situation, had clearly done little to quell Karen's inherent distrust. Her gaze remained fixed on me, a mixture of suspicion and outright disbelief swirling in her eyes. The fact that I wasn't wearing a uniform seemed to be an insurmountable barrier to her accepting any potential authority I might hold. In her world, law enforcement wore a specific costume, and anything outside that sartorial definition was automatically suspect. With you? Karen repeated, her tone laced with skepticism. But he's not in uniform. He doesn't look like a police officer. Her pronouncement was delivered with the unwavering conviction of someone stating an undeniable truth. I sighed inwardly. This was becoming unnecessarily complicated. My preference was always to handle situations with a low profile, avoiding any unnecessary attention. However, Karen's persistent refusal to acknowledge my potential authority was now bordering on obstruction and was certainly delaying the resolution of the minor signage issue. Ma'am, I said, my voice calm but firm, while Sergeant Miller is in uniform and easily identifiable, law enforcement officers often work in plain clothes for various reasons. Our authority is not solely defined by what we wear. Karen scoffed, a short, dismissive sound. Oh, please. I've seen enough television to know what police officers look like. You don't fit the bill. Her self-proclaimed expertise, gleaned from fictional dramas, was now being used to challenge my legitimacy. The small crowd that had gathered was now openly watching the exchange, a few even stifling giggles at Karen's audacity. Sarah, the young volunteer, looked on with a mixture of apprehension and a dawning sense of amusement. Karen, a voice interjected, laced with a hint of exasperation. It was Mr. Henderson, the organizer Karen had so readily dismissed earlier, approaching the group. What's going on here? Sarah was just following my instructions regarding the pottery demonstration signs. Karen turned on him, her indignation immediately reignited. Mr. Henderson, these signs are completely inappropriate. They're obstructing pedestrian traffic and they look dreadful. And this gentleman, she gestured towards me with a dismissive wave, seems to think he has some authority here, despite not looking the part at all. Mr. Henderson, a mild-mannered man known for his patience, finally seemed to reach his limit. Karen, with all due respect, I am the head of the organizing committee. I approve the placement of those signs. And as for Alex, he turned to me with a knowing look. Alex is here to help ensure the safety and security of the entire event. He deliberately emphasized the last part, hoping Karen would pick up on the implication. However, Karen remained stubbornly fixated on my appearance. Safety and security? He looks like he's here to browse the craft stalls. Her disbelief was unwavering. At this point, I knew I had to be more direct. Karen's persistent challenge to my authority was not only hindering the resolution of the immediate issue, but was also potentially undermining any future interactions I might need to have within the community while on duty. With a deliberate movement, I reached inside my polo shirt and withdrew my badge, flipping it open and displaying it clearly for Karen to see. The gold shield glinted in the bright sunlight. "Ma'am," I said, my voice now carrying the unmistakable tone of authority, "I am Special Agent, my last name, with name of agency, e.g., the County Sheriff's Department, the State Police. I am on duty here at the community fair." The effect on Karen was instantaneous and dramatic. Her face, which had been contorted in an expression of indignant disbelief, suddenly went pale. Her mouth dropped slightly and the color drained from her cheeks. The air of self-assured superiority that had radiated from her moments before completely evaporated, replaced by a look of utter shock and dawning horror. The small crowd that had gathered gasped audibly. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise, while Mr. Henderson simply stared, a look of grim satisfaction slowly spreading across his face. Karen's gaze remained fixed on my badge, her mind clearly struggling to process the reality of the situation. The unassuming gentleman in the polo shirt was not just a random bystander. He was law enforcement, the very authority she so often invoked when it suited her, and so readily dismissed when it didn't fit her preconceived notions. You're a police officer," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper, stripped of its usual sharp edge. I nodded slowly, my gaze unwavering. "Yes, ma'am. And right now, I need you to stop harassing the event volunteers and allow them to carry out their duties as instructed by the organizing committee." The woman who had so readily judged me based on my appearance was now confronted with the stark reality of her monumental blunder. The stage was set for a resolution that would undoubtedly be both satisfying and, hopefully, educational for the Queen of Meadowbrook's self-proclaimed social hierarchy. The air crackled with the unspoken weight of her misjudgment, the bright sunshine suddenly feeling a little less cheerful for the once indomitable HOA Karen. The stunned silence that followed the reveal of my badge hung in the air, thick with Karen's palpable shock and the quiet amusement of the onlookers. Her face remained pale, her mouth slightly agape, the image of the self-assured HOA Karen momentarily shattered by the undeniable reality of the situation. I, I had no idea," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper, the usual imperious tone completely absent. Her gaze darted nervously between my badge and my face, as if trying to reconcile the unassuming individual in the polo shirt with the authority the gold shield represented. "Perhaps," I said calmly, my voice regaining a more neutral tone, "it's a good reminder that appearances can be deceiving, ma'am, and that judging individuals based solely on what they look like can lead to inaccurate conclusions." My words carried a subtle but pointed undertone, the irony of her earlier judgment hanging heavy in the air. Karen's eyes flickered towards Sarah, who was trying to suppress a smile, and then to Mr. Henderson, who was observing the scene with a distinct look of satisfaction. A wave of embarrassment seemed to wash over her, adding a flush to her previously pale cheeks. I I apologize," she mumbled, the words sounding forced and uncharacteristic. "I simply wanted to ensure that the event was well organized and aesthetically pleasing." Her attempt to justify her earlier behavior fell flat in the face of her monumental misjudgment. "While your desire for a well-organized event is understandable, ma'am," I replied, my tone still firm but less confrontational, "it's important to treat the event staff and volunteers with respect and to allow them to carry out their assigned duties. Mr. Naniuan Henderson, as the head of the organizing committee, has the authority to determine the placement of signage." I turned my attention to Sarah and Mr. Henderson. "Please continue with your plans. If there are any further issues, feel free to contact one of the uniformed officers on duty." Sarah offered a grateful smile, and Mr. Henderson gave me a discreet nod of thanks. The small crowd that had gathered began to disperse, the brief moment of drama seemingly resolved. Karen, however, remained standing there, looking somewhat lost and bewildered. The air of self-importance that usually surrounded her had completely dissipated, replaced by a visible awkwardness. "Is there anything else, ma'am?" I asked, my tone neutral, but indicating that the conversation was coming to a close. Karen shook her head slowly, still seemingly processing the events that had just transpired. "No, no, Agent, my last name. I, I understand. Keston." The title felt foreign and clumsy on her tongue, a stark contrast to her earlier dismissive tone. I offered a polite nod and turned to continue my rounds, keeping a discreet eye on the rest of the fair. Over the course of the community fair, I observed Karen from a distance. Her usual assertive demeanor was noticeably subdued. She engaged in fewer lengthy guidance sessions with event staff and seemed to keep a lower profile. On the few occasions our paths crossed, she offered a brief, almost hesitant nod, a far cry from her earlier confident pronouncements. In the weeks and months that followed, a subtle but significant shift occurred in Karen's behavior within Meadowbrook. The sharp edges of her HOA Karen persona seemed to soften. While she still maintained her meticulous standards for her own property, her pronouncements on the perceived shortcomings of others became less frequent and less strident. There were even whispers of her being slightly more polite in neighborhood association meetings. The story of the plainclothes officer and the HOA Karen who didn't think he looked the part became a minor legend within the local law enforcement circles, often recounted with a wry smile. It served as a humorous reminder that authority doesn't always come in the expected package, and that snap judgments based on appearances can often lead to rather awkward situations. For me, the resolution wasn't about reveling in Karen's embarrassment, but in the quiet satisfaction of upholding order and resolving a situation with professionalism, even in the face of unwarranted skepticism. It served as a gentle reminder that respect for authority should be based on the office held, not on superficial appearances, and that sometimes the most effective form of authority is the quiet, undeniable truth revealed at the right moment.